Hey, Lana and friends. So I have a two-part AI-themed show and tell here. First, I want to show llama configuration per Lana's request, and then second, I want to show something that I wrote on my own. So llama here is the self-hosted LLM. I set this up yesterday. Let me disclaim that I went into this blind, and I've only been screwing around with this for about 45 minutes or so. So I'm not an expert here, right? But installing this, architecturally, there are kind of two main components here. There's llama, the executable, and then there's a model that you pass llama as data. So installing llama, or rather some kind of open source port of llama, I'm not sure. But there's a repo on GitHub, and I'm running Debian Linux here, so I just read the README for how to install it, and actually I need something else. When you install this thing, you're going to be able to install it with or without what's called CUDA Blast or something. CUDA is a tool produced by NVIDIA that allows programs like this to use your GPU for computation. And I ran this both with and without CUDA support. And I have an ancient GPU and a fairly monstrous CPU. And I can say regardless, the GPU version was much, much faster. So I recommend building this with CUDA support, with GPU support. But for me, so the first thing I did was I installed CUDA. I just Googled it, found the installer, followed the instructions. This was very straightforward. Again, for Debian Linux, I don't know what the Windows process would look like. And then I cloned the repo, ran make with this flag, and it built. And that was surprisingly straightforward. I expected to end up in dependency hell, and it wasn't bad at all. So now we have llama, the executable, running. Now we need a model. The model I found on Hugging Face, and I was just recommended a Llama 2 compatible model by another friend who's dorking around with this stuff right now. And I found a 6 gigabyte model. I think it was this one, and I downloaded it. And you don't need to know anything about that or do anything with it. It's just a blob of math. It's a blob of data, right? So now you have llama running on your machine. We pass that model, with the -m here as an argument, and we run this. There are a couple other flags for tuning that I haven't learned much about yet, but we fired this up, and you can see I've got my GPU stats here and my CPU stats, and this is surprisingly easy on my system. I'll reiterate that my GPU is an NVIDIA 1070, which is probably almost 10 years old or something, but the 6 gig model fits on VRAM, I guess. So now we have a prompt. The prompt isn't great. The ergonomics aren't great. It's a single read line, but it's starting point. And we can ask it a question. I don't know. Please compare and contrast the Unity and Unreal game engines. And it does its thing. And you can see, so we're burning CPU and our GPU both, but it's pretty fast, right? And it's producing readable text. I've screwed around with this a little bit, and it's it can be confidently wrong sometimes. Excuse me. It can hallucinate sometimes, but it's relatively fast and it produces readable English. Now again, this 6 gig model produces terrible code, complete garbage. But for just natural language kind of stuff, it's not bad. I'm not going to bother to read this, but you can pause the video if you're interested in the output. It's got a lot to say here this time. But yeah, so I would not use the 6 gig model that I've downloaded as a programming companion. But it's probably good enough to be a rubber duck if you just want something to talk to while you're working through a problem or something. Or, maybe more interesting in the future, even this right now is probably good enough to wire up to an NPC in a game or something, which would be really cool, right? That's show and tell number 1. That's llama. The thing I want to show now, show and tell number 2, is a project that I've been working on and off in my free time a little bit. which is a wrapper around the GPT-3 and 4, OpenAI API. So let's go over here. So this is a program that I wrote in Go, and because it's written in Go, it's cross-platform. It'll run on Windows, Linux, Mac, whatever, BSDs. And basically what we're doing here is we're just exposing more of the search, like more of the API interface to OpenAI than is exposed via the web interface. That's goal one. Goal two is to bring that ChatGPT functionality into the shell, into the editor. And goal three is to create like a locally hosted database of all of your conversations that you've had with ChatGPT. And so far this works pretty well, but we're on the shell here. This is the interface for the application. You can do a lot, but there's only a handful of commands that you need often. Central to the way this program works is the concept of a session. And a session is just sort of a topic of discussion, which will have a history and a prompt. So, my example here is I've created an audit session, and I've passed it this kind of overriding prompt. I forget what this is called, but this is a mechanism that is not exposed in the ChatGPT web client. But if you look at the API, you can pass with every prompt that you send it this other piece of data that's called like a role or something, which is just like a hint on how to behave, like what personality to assume when it's talking to the user. So here's one we've created for the demo here. You're a security analyst working on a security engineering team. The user will provide you with source code to audit. You're to review the provided source code and do the following. 1, audit the source code for security vulnerabilities. 2, if the code contains vulnerabilities, explain them to the user. Link to authoritative reference documentation when possible. 3, if applicable, generate source code that contains remediations. Your goal is not only to fix source code directly, but also to instruct users how to write more secure code going forward. So we've prompted this thing, and it's a security analyst, right? And that prompt will be invisibly sent along with every query that we send going forward. So now let's pretend I'm a novice, engineer, and I write some PHP that is obviously vulnerable at face value here via the SQL injection. To use this tool, if I want feedback on this code, we can do this in the shell or in our editor or whatever, but I'll do it on the shell. We can do GPT question ask, and this is going to pull up the editor that you have configured for your system. And I'm just going to ask, how does this look to you, right? We don't really need to be very formal here because we have that prompt that we wrote a second ago, and we copy and paste in our relevant snippet, and we let it do its thing. This will take some amount of time depending on if you're using GPT-3 or GPT-4, and depending on how busy this is. So we wait. And we get a response, and it identified the SQL injection. It identified that an attacker can manipulate offset to inject into the SQL string. And just at a glance, it's telling us to create a prepared statement, which is very sensible. And I'd have to look at the documentation to see if this is correct. I don't understand why I don't see this prepared statement being used. But in general, that's the gist, and it links to the relevant documentation. I'm assuming that these docs are correct and not hallucinations. One thing I'll note is that for the sake of the demo, I have this configured right now against GPT-3 because it's a lot faster. What I found just by using this is that GPT-4 is wildly accurate. So this may or may not be correct. I really thought that this should be like statement execute or something, though I haven't written PHP in many years. But in any case, you get the idea. And correctness and stuff is OpenAI's concern. My concern is the ergonomics of using this in the shell. And what we get is nice color coding and syntax highlighting and all of this stuff in the shell. So it's pretty convenient. And then, the last thing I'll show off is, like I said, this is all stored locally in a SQLite 3 database. So if we need to search this or something, or refer back to the logs, we can do GPT session log, and here's everything that we had. And again, logs are stored by topic. So if we're working in PHP over here and we have a Linux system admin question over here, maybe we're working on like a home improvement project over here, all of those discussion histories are kept separate. In any case, I haven't open sourced this yet, but I plan to. I plan to publish this alongside my cheat project, which has become very popular, but I'm still dorking around with designing the interface of this thing because it's still not quite where I want it to be. But probably within a month or so, I'll be happy with it, and I'll do a 1.0 release probably to GitHub, I assume, alongside the cheat project. I think that's all I got to say. If you have questions, let me know. I'm happy to chat about this. And also, oh yeah, the last thing I will say is that I am going to build dedicated hardware soon for Llama, because the 6 gig model is cool, but I want to see what like the 30 gig models can do. And I've got a bunch of unused GPUs and unused hardware, so I want to put together a GPU cluster and see what we can do with more competent hardware. Anyway, I think that's it. Thanks.